All right, technology is now working with us as I am, my voice is, what's the word? Amplified, that's what I'm looking for. Welcome to the November installment of the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee. We have a quorum in the room, and I would imagine we'll probably have a couple folks join online as well. Let's go around the room, or around the bench here and do introductions, and then we'll go online and do introductions. Which side do we started with you last time. Let's start with you, Carrie, this time.
Carrie Sheldon, Precinct G.
Eric Henriksen, MCD.
Patty Thorson, Trellis.
Hoda Chave, temporary admin.
Darrell Paulsen, Vice Chair in Region F, I believe.
David Fenley, Chair.
Andy Streasick, Metro Mobility.
Patsy Murphy, Precinct C.
Richard Rowan, AARP.
Heidi Meyer, Minnesota CCD.
Doug Cook, Metro Transit.
Claudia Fugly, MNCZD.
Awesome. Thank you, members and support staff, very much. Before I ask for a motion to approve the agenda, just going to move one thing real quick to the bottom.
Do anybody on?
I don't see. Oh, sorry.
Forgot about that?
Sam, yes. Sam, you're so hard to forget about. I don't know how I did it, Sam. Yes, take it away online. Looks like we have one person. I think that's Sam joining us online. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Jasmine, Precinct A.
Thank you, Sam.
And did you do the
Thank you.
audience too?
I did not do the audience, but
Okay, should I run the meeting?
it's not necessary to do the audience. I know. I think in the past we have done it sometimes, but I sort of stopped doing
The
that.
audience can come up during public comment if they'd like.
It helps the meeting minute taker to reflect in the minutes who all's present in the audience. I think that's the only reason they do it.
Okay. Well, if y'all want to do it, we can do it. Folks in the audience, you want to just let us know who you are?
Christine Kennan, Senior Manager of Metropolitan.
Hey.
Brittany Hoff, Dakota County Travel Trainer.
Cool.
Sophia Ginis, Metro Transit Director of Community Affairs.
Awesome. We'll be hearing from you very shortly, Sophia. I want to move the number 2 on the agenda to the bottom, just because I think the other 3 things are more important than listening to me pontificate. So if nobody has any problems with that, we'll move number 2 to be number 4, and then 3 and 4 up
What
one.
was the question again?
I want to move the second agenda item to the very end, because I want to make sure that we get through
What's the second agenda?
the second agenda item. So ADA Implement Stories by yours truly.
Okay.
Talk a little bit about October being National Disability Employment Awareness Month, which ended yesterday. But I think that the other 3 items on the agenda are more important, and if we have time, we can get to the second thing.
I believe you.
So I'm going to make that amendment to the agenda and then seek a motion to approve.
Patsy, I'll approve it.
So
Second.
motion.
So moved. And a second? Did I
We
hear
have
one?
like multiples.
Second.
Awesome. So we have two motions in 4 seconds.
I don't think that requires a full action to make to change item.
Oh, no, we were just approving the agenda with that already moved on. So we had a motion and a second, is there any discussion?
No.
All in favor, aye.
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 Opposed, no. Awesome, passes with the amended agenda item. All right, I will now entertain a motion to approve October's meeting minutes.
So move.
Thank you, Darrell.
Moved.
Anybody dying to do second? Thank you
Second.
very much.
Sam got it in.
All right, we got it in there. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No? Cool. We are through the logistics of our meeting, and
Minutes from last month.
I think we ended up,
Not.
did we not have a quorum when we did that last month? I thought somebody showed up when we did it.
Oh, yeah, we did.
After the first agenda item, I think.
We adopted the minutes from last
Approval
month.
of the minutes.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, we just did that.
we did. I thought we just adopted the agenda.
We just did that too.
Look in the minutes.
Yep. No, I think we're on par.
It's the,
Agenda was approved and approval of minutes is on the front page.
gotcha.
Perfect. Thank you all very much.
Then we also changed something around and we approved that too.
All right, let's dive right into Network Now.
We already-
I'm pretty sure we've heard from you before, but if you want to just give us a quick, I'm pretty sure, I don't know, everything blends into one in my life for some reason.
We have, I remember her smile. She has an infectious smile, and she must like transit because she always smiles when she gives her presentation.
Well, I hope you do. You work for a transit organization. So Sophia, please come.
Thanks, Sophie, for reading.
Yeah, give us a little background and then dive right in on the updates for Network Now.
Sounds good. I'm Sophia Ginis. I'm Metro Transit's Director of Community Affairs. And to the Vice Chair's point, I get to smile every day because I get to work on improving our transit system daily. So who wouldn't smile at that? You feel free to call me Sophia, and I use she, her pronouns. So today I'm here to talk about Network Now. If you can put your memory caps on back to the early spring, I came to you with the Network Now project before we had even gotten it started, to get your feedback on our approach and to ask for your input on ensuring that we heard from diverse communities. Doug, sitting right there, helped with some of the outreach related to Network Now as well. And so I'm here today and Jason, feel free to go to the next slide, to kind of give you an overview of the project itself, just because I know since it's been since the spring, kind of what is this project, what is Network Now, kind of review where we are, and then talk about what we heard, some of the background, and then the next steps. And so overall, Network Now is Metro Transit's way of determining what our service is going to be going forward. And we had this big pandemic, now we got some sales tax, we're still seeing operator hiring. So how do we prioritize resources? How do we make decisions? This is what this project's all about. Jason, next slide. And the next one. So a little bit about the overall timeline. I came on the screen right now. There are kind of the project steps, which is creating our guiding framework. Then we get into the evaluation of how we might change our network. And then we come out with an actual plan. And then we'll go with the final plan to the council and ask them to adopt it. That first, kind of creating our framework, we wanted to complete that by the fall of this year, which we just did. I came to you all when there's a blue arrow pointing kind of at the end of complete fall 2023. We are here right now. I came to you all when that arrow would have been at the very beginning of that box to kind of talk about our plan. Overall, we hope to complete this project by summer of next year, so 2024. And this project kind of builds on itself. So even now, it is helping Metro Transit make decisions for where we prioritize service over the next couple. We do kind of quarterly changes with our service. We call them picks. Even in those, we've taken some of the principles from Network Now. Next slide, please. So just a reminder of kind of what this project is attempting to address. So we could create new or redesign bus routes to best meet the needs of today.
You're going to.
We'll look at kind of how often the bus comes or how long it runs throughout the day, early in the morning, late at night. There's probably many, many questions still out there of, I'd usually take a bus and it's been discontinued for X number of years. Will it ever come back? Or this facility is no longer in use. Is it going to come back? That's what this project will answer. We have to plan for our Metro line implementation. So I'm sure you've had other presentations about, we did D-line recently open. We have B-line under construction, as well as many other projects. Gold Line is about to open. So we have to plan and put aside resources to operate those well. And so this project will discuss that as well. And then look at what's changed in our world since the beginning of the pandemic. So things like microtransit as solutions for potentially access and whatnot. So that's what this project is looking at. Again, it's only Metro Transit. It is a short-term plan for kind of the immediate. Next slide. So, and it's okay, we won't go back a slide, but I'll say what the other slide was about. So the whole first step was to get to this set of these principles that are on the screen right now. And seems like just words, right? You put some principles out there, but I really want to stress that these were based in a lot of work. And so we think of this first step as creating our foundation. Like before big decisions are even made, how do we create this just solid foundation on which to make decisions? And so we call it kind of the three-legged stool. So it is policy, things that come, for example, from the Met Council. So a review of all the policy that governs Metro Transit in our decision-making. It is our network performance and ridership. So what are we seeing in our system now? Where do we know people want to go? Where is our highest ridership? Kind of looking at how is our network doing? So our performance. And then there was public engagement, a lot of public engagement. And I'll go a little bit more into that as well in the next slides. But that's how we got these principles. And I'll just read them. Jason, go back a sec, please. I'll just read them real quick for folks. So adapt service to changes in transit markets and travel patterns. We heard very clearly from our customers that, hey, the world has changed in some ways. People are traveling differently than they did prior to COVID. Be nimble in those ways. Prepare for our metro and high frequency routes. And so we heard a lot from folks, we're making these significant investments. We need to make sure that we're supporting them. And in a lot of ways, these metro networks are being built where we also have a fair amount of ridership, so supporting our ridership as well. Maintain the reliability of our scheduled service consistently over time. So I know everybody can relate to this one, right? Like you're waiting for your bus, does it come on time? And there's things that Metro Transit can't always control when it comes to reliability, but there are many things that we can do to make sure that we're being as reliable as possible. And so really kind of almost in a way setting aside resources for on-time performance and predictability of our services. Build on success to grow ridership, adding service where people use transit the most. And so, that's kind of it seems like a very straightforward one, but really we really wanted it to be reflected to us, right? Of really care and plan for ridership. Well, at the same time, principle number 5, really think of where provide access to opportunities and service with a focus on advancing equity and reducing regional disparities. So really thinking of what all this network needs to do. So these are our principles. And from that, we'll take some of the next steps in the project to really evaluate, these are our principles, how is our network doing today in comparison to them? We'll develop additional metrics that help us give us solid things. And then we'll look at changes. Those changes that we'll make, how do things perform for today versus others? Next slide, please. I just wanted to give a little bit more of a background on kind of how these principles got developed. So if you look at something like adopt service to changes in travel markets, transit markets and travel patterns, we asked survey questions about that. We engaged in workshops. We came and talked to folks like you all. We looked at planning data. We looked at policy. And then we reflected how people described that to us or what we've seen in travel markets. Like we saw changes in travel patterns, since 2020, and some Some things were even needs were even changing before the pandemic, and so recognizing that. So again, putting a lot of thought into what guides the work that we do. Next slide. So I want to go into a little bit about what we heard throughout this process, and I'll just kind of go over that really quickly. Next slide. So we had over 5,000 unique points of contact from the public to help us shape this project, including over 6,000 unique comments that we analyzed. We got that feedback from surveys, from going on to surveys that were sent electronically. We also went on to our vehicles and hung out at transit stations and interacted with people directly. Not everybody feels comfortable taking a survey, so we also documented comments just with what people were willing to engage with us in that moment. We did have materials translated, but sometimes it's just easier to have a conversation with people as well. We had group and individual meetings. We reached out to organizations across our region that specialize in a whole bunch of various things and asked if they wanted additional information on Network Now. And we also analyzed the feedback that we just get continuously through our customer relations department. Next slide. Overall, of those 5,000, over 4,000 came from our survey. Next slide. And just as a reminder, the survey itself, and when I presented this spring, I kind of asked you all about some of these trade-off questions, was we asked, when you make decisions about where you put resources, you can't always have it all, right? You can only do one or the other. So the 12 survey questions really tried to get at, if you could only do A or you could only do B, what would you do? And that helped us get a gauge of where our priorities are regionally. We also asked 3 questions about basically points. I like to pretend that it's money, right? But we put it in points. You have basically 100 points, and we asked 3 questions. One about kind of just various areas, types of service, and values. And then 3 open-ended questions. We also got demographic questions. And the demographic questions are important because we also wanted to understand not what everybody said to us, but what various groups said to us, so we could look into potentially different needs as we move forward. And so I'll give you one example of how we analyzed that data that we heard from the public. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, one more about demographics. I thought I was going to go into my, so this is a little bit of the demographic breakdown of the folks that we heard from. It was really important to us to hear from people of multiple races and ethnicities, various ages, folks that identify as having a disability and those that didn't, various income levels. It's often harder to hear from folks with lower incomes, and so we put a lot of effort into getting those perspectives, as well as ensuring that people that were answering the survey rode with us. Because we both want to understand what might make you ride with us, but also really taking care of those that are using our system today. Next slide. So I'm going to go into one example of the feedback we received. Go to the next slide. So this is one of the money questions. We had $100 or 100 points, as I like to say, to talk about where your values were. And we asked about ridership, equity, coverage, and geographic evenness. And one of the importances of this question is sometimes when we would talk about coverage or equity, people would just kind of use the terms interchangeably, and we really wanted to pull that conversation out. So we put definitions around each of them, kind of clear definitions so that we can all be using the same language. Next slide. And what we found was that overall, people valued ridership the most, with coverage, equity, and geographic evenness following. But when we start to break out different demographic groups, That pattern, while stays in that order, you see people of color allocating more points to some of those other factors, such as equity. Go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Oh,
That's it.
I think it did it skipped.
We had to go back.
Okay, it's good. Forward. And then I also wanted to bring forth by disability status. So when we're asking about whether folks identified as having a disability or not, additional points were allocated to equity, coverage, or geographic evenness. And we also saw that by almost the exact same distribution by income level. And so that helps us, when we're making decisions, know kind of overall values, but also start to think about the needs of individual groups. Chair, there's a question if you want to take it, or at the end.
Yes, by all means, go ahead.
My question
Heidi.
is, were you very clear what you were asking about disability? Because there's physical disabilities, and there's me who has physical and processing disabilities. So I have to process all your ideas and how to get to that bus stop from that new location that you surveyed and said that would be perfect for the community. So did you talk about that? Because some people might have where their brain is kind of, and is a disability, but they're not putting it as it is a recognized disability if it falls under the right categories. Did you talk about that?
Yeah, that's an improvement that we made recently in our survey. So we just used to ask, do you identify as having a disability, yes or no? And what we've started to do now is we call out different types of potential disabilities. And we found that by, explaining, giving people more options to not just check, I have a disability, yes or no, but kind of the examples that you gave, actually more people respond because they understand that the question is kind of for them.
Because I've seen the bus stop a lot, and there are people you wouldn't even know have a disability because you can't see it, but
Right.
But you kind of know by their reactions and how they talk or move or do certain things. But you wouldn't know it just if they were just standing there,
Right, and I can say words, sorry, forming my thought. We only recorded, so if people, like, for example, came to one of our meetings, we didn't record any demographic information. So if their feedback was from like an in-person engagement, we don't have staff say, try to guess. But if they filled out the survey directly or our staff went through the survey with them, then we recorded the demographic information.
Cool.
Thank you.
So next slide. So what comes next with Network Now? If you go to the next slide. So this was the very beginning of this project. So next, we will develop additional metrics to give clear planning guidance. So we kind of went through the principles, but we have to put weight kind of behind them and meaning so that we can make decisions. And then we need to begin to actually make suggestions for our network. And we want to really update stakeholders as we go, because we don't want to get to the end and be like, here's our draft network, what do you think? Without kind of letting people know where we're headed. So my questions for all of you today is, what did you think about the first step? And what else would you want us to consider as we really start putting these overall values and framework into adapting Metro Transit's network and prioritizing our resources?
Perfect. I think we have a few questions. I know I have some down here. I'm going to ask a real basic, naive question that I think you might have already addressed, and then I'll go to Darrell just to kind of get things kicked off. So what would be the overarching goal, or is that yet to be defined by this? Is it efficiency? Is it serving riders better? Like, what's the goal of Network Now? What would be the ultimate outcome, from this?
So the principles are really what we're going to try to make this project be. We started out with, going back, when I first came to talk to you all in the spring, was the first time that we actually believed in a long time that we might be able to add service. Because when we started thinking about Network Now, we weren't sure the sales tax would pass and we would have a steady stream of funding. And it was the first time that we'd actually seen positive operator hiring trends. So Network Now was born at a time of, hey, what happens if we have to cut? And then assuming that we have these resources, what do we do with them? And instead of saying, hey, this is what Metro Transit thinks we should do, react to it, we decided to take a bottom-up approach and really get to our region's values and priorities and spend a significant amount of time engaging. So that's why I say, Jason, if you just want to go back to the principal slide, I think it's slide 3 or 4.
7.
7, thank you, slide 7.
Which is perfect because I have a question on one of the principles too. And then I'll go to other people, but I'll let you finish addressing the first question.
So that's why I kind of stressed a little bit that they seem like just, here's the things, right? But a lot of foundational work was put into, one more back, thank you, into making sure that these were right and that they were encompassing and that we weren't really missing any main things. And understanding too, with these goals, they're still somewhat in conflict with each other. And what I mean by that is, growing ridership and providing access still might have some trade-offs within them. And that's why the next step is kind of developing these metrics in which we look at our network. So kind of going into how you analyzed all of them. So the goals or the principles, the things that we'll achieve now through Network Now are these 5 elements, given resource allocation.
So on number 5, how broad is the definition for access to opportunities and services? What do opportunities and services mean? What do you mean by that?
So some of the basics are jobs and education.
Okay.
But then also thinking of access to like medical facilities, cultural resources.
So in the most broad definition, I kind of figured that. I just wanted to make sure that's what you were talking about. Basically, being in your community, whatever that entails, buying groceries, going to the doctor, going to the bar, getting to your job, whatever it may be. Okay. And I said I was only going to ask 1, but I'm going to ask 3, sorry. This includes all of Metro Transit services involved?
Yes, so this is a plan for all of Metro Transit, and that's why the Metro network is specifically identified in it. We actually kind of asked, we were making these investments, should we stack resources towards them? And people reflected back to us, basically yes. Because it could be a decision, right? Like, okay, you open these things, but you don't open them how you intend.
All right, I'm going to go to Darrell and then Heidi. Go ahead, Darrell.
Sophia, my question is, out of the 6,000 comments you got, how often you guys look at those and do those surveys during different times of day, during different elements of the weather, during different times of let's say a ridership, let's say, like if you're doing it during peak time versus non-peak time, or if you're doing it when the bus just had an accident 2 miles down the road, you're out there doing some surveys after that. It might sound a little differently and you might get a different response. So how often was the surveys done through a variety of different weather and different elements in daytime and nighttime?
So we left this survey open for quite a long time, close to 3 months. And part of that was to get the numbers that we had on this survey, you have to do a lot of work. Sure. And we didn't want it to just be through electronic means, because typically when we get a fair amount of responses, just by putting out a survey through like rider alerts and our newsletters and things like that. That's important step 2, but the responses from purely electronic means tend to be people that are white, people with higher incomes.
And to has access to that type of that type of response.
So we really invested quite a lot of time and effort into going onto various bus routes at different times of the day, spread geographically across the region. We held a series of.
Were you out there at midnight? That's what I want to know. Were you out there in the really cold times and the troubled times that people actually depend on our system and actually use our system? We don't just use our system for pure social reasons or just to go to work or just to go to the grocery store. Everybody uses the system all the time. That's why the system runs, as early as it does and as late as it does.
We did not go, I don't think we were out as late as midnight, but I will note that for future surveys that we do. But that you're hitting at what we were trying to accomplish, which is to hear from many, many folks that rely on our system and use it in different ways.
Yeah, and the people that are using your system the way that you don't want them to use your system, you're not hitting those people because you're not out there accessing them at the time that they're out there. So if you want them not to be using stuff on the trains or not to be using it as a sleep car, maybe you need to be out there during the time that they're doing that.
I hear you.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious to dig into that. Did any of those instances occur? If you're on the trains or the buses and like a safety issue arises while the surveyor is there, I'm curious if anything like that occurred. I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
Right. And
Yeah.
if it didn't occur, then you're not out there at the times
Well,
riding the system, because the system is really, if you're out there looking at the system, in the last 3 months, it's definitely different.
Yes, we had safety issues related to the people doing the survey.
That's what.
One incident, actually, we had to have intervention because a customer was physically threatening the person doing the survey. We have a wonderful outreach team, and there was actually a lot of folks that were resistant to talking to Metro Transit. They didn't like seeing us on the vehicles. And I have some really skilled outreach staff, and they warmed up a bunch of folks. So, the people on my team, we value everyone, and that is shown in how we approach our work. And I could go into detail about talking to people that look threatening and getting their opinions as well. And we do all of those things. So,
Well, thank you for that, because definitely, as a rider, as somebody who rides public transit almost on a daily basis, certainly maybe multiple times a week, I have definitely seen changes in the system. Some good, but mostly very scary changes, mostly very not so safe changes. But what am I supposed to do? I still have to use that system to get to my next event, or I get to get to my child, or I got to get home or whatever. So I still have to use that dangerous service. And you tell me it's gonna get better. And and the only way it gets better is if you access the system at the times that it has the most trouble on it. And you see that, you live it, like a lot of people that use transit on a daily basis.
Chair, Vice Chair, we had a lot of discussion too about whether safety was a defined principle that you see on the screen right now. But what we kind of landed on was that multiple of these metrics can have an impact on safety, and so we can look through basically all of them with a safety lens as well as we make decisions, because I think safety and our comfort on our system is one of the top issues that we hear consistently from all of our users.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do see how, just to kind of, I actually really like the question because it gets at, data collection and surveying and, samples, whatever that may be. But I think it's a good question because the responses that you get are going to be based on the people you're asking, and different people write at different times in different areas. So it's good. Are you getting the late night folks? Are you getting the early morning folks? You're just getting, the 9 to 5 commuter folks. Everybody has different experiences. So I think it's important to, the survey responses will result in, who you're asking the questions to. So thank you,
Can I
Darrell,
ask a
for that.
follow-up to that?
Yeah, a follow-up to that, and then we'll come to you, Heidi.
Is any of this affected by, limited by the hours that your staff that's doing the outreach, that they're working? What is everybody working 9 to 5 or 7:30 to 3:30, which would limit what feedback you'd get? Does that?
Yeah, so the outreach coordinators that help support this work, their typical hours are business hours, but we also work early mornings, nights and weekends, nights and weekends. And some of the events that we held, we specifically held them, later in the evening or early in the morning to try to provide access. And when we're at our transit facilities, sometimes you try to hit the most high boarding times. But then, for example, we were out at Sunray kind of late at night trying to catch some of I think to the vice chair's point, some of the folks that are relying on those transit connections to get home from later shifts.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we lose the element of when are people available, but it's good to know.
And it's why we collect the demographic questions, because if we heard from, for example, nobody that was low income or nobody that lived in the East Metro, or not good representative samples, we would know that we needed to keep the survey open longer.
Yep.
And so it's kind of our ongoing litmus test of are we hearing from diverse folks, and do we have enough numbers in each category to kind of dive into what folks are telling us.
Good, yeah.
This is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I'm curious, did y'all jump on any trains after a United game?
We may have. One of the, I don't know if it was a United game, but we did jump onto some very, very full trains and conclude that it was not actually very conducive to getting around the vehicle to ask for surveys. So
That was more of a joke, I can imagine.
At that time, anyway.
I think it was a Twins game, actually. Or no, it's baseball. I don't know what at that time, maybe what
Well, there's
spring
parking
sports. I don't know.
Downtown, there's no parking.
I'm not a good enough sports person to tell you all the
That's what I was
details.
gonna say, the Twins game, if you go to that one, because I go to the Twins, it's packed.
Yes, sorry to maybe
Sardines.
distract from the conversation. I was just more curious if y'all hit that crowd. Heidi, go ahead.
My question is, did you go out into the suburbs? Because I live in West St. Paul. So it's different, because some of the stuff that you guys put together is in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and maybe some local outer area. But how far out do you go? Because I go to Inver Grove Heights, because there's the Walmart out there, because they have certain things that my Walmart in West St. Paul doesn't have. I've gone to South St. Paul. I've gone to outside. I've even gone to Burnsville when you used to have to go all the way to, well, you still have to do some of that. Go to the Mall of America just to go to Burnsville. You have to go backwards to go forward, just to do some shopping and to do some stuff, because that's where it was located. So did you reach out there? And also, are you thinking about, when you do the survey, is where I'm standing, is it handicapped accessible? Is, in that survey, are you thinking about, okay, I'm a person with a disability, I have multiple, I gotta understand how to get there. Can I understand all the road signs or the directions, and is it handicapped accessible in the wintertime and the summer? Because there are bus stops in West St. Paul that are not zip zero. It's just get off the bus and fend for yourself. you know? So are you thinking of those things as you do the survey and put it together? I'm just not a body or a number, but there's different elements that go into that helps me get where I need to go.
Yes, so we tracked zip code of folks and made sure that we didn't hear just from the core cities, but from suburban areas and some of the in-person events that we held. We tried to make sure that we got out kind of to the reaches of the various suburbs, whether that was being up in Brooklyn Center or down in Richfield or kind of getting out to like the Woodbury area. So we really tried to get around the region. And you know, the wonderful thing about a survey is that it is electronic. So we not only did Metro Transit put out the survey, but we asked various organizations and some even city governments put it in on their websites and whatnot to try to reach further. Minnetonka, for example, went above and beyond in pushing out the Network Now survey. So we heard from a lot of folks in Minnetonka, for example. So you know, we really. And, you know, I always will take additional feedback on how to reach people. And part of why I came to you all before we started the survey was to get some of those ideas. And so hopefully some of the methods and the things that we did is reflective of the feedback that this group gave initially.
And are you talking about safety too? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because lately I've been seeing a lot of windows being fixed, like on a few buses and a lot of trains where it's been damaged by someone. And I actually saw this where somebody started it and a little kid finished it, but someone took off the handicap sign sticker off one of them and was playing with it. It had the whole big sheet and it's on film and everything, and I was on the train, saw it all, and was playing with it, and I thought, this is getting ridiculous. You know, even the handicap stickers are getting damaged, you know, so are we thinking about the safety? 'Cause I've actually been at trains and bus stops where people are telling me, I'm afraid to go certain places because of my safety. I'm afraid to do certain things. So, you know, you want us out there, but how are you gonna make sure that I can go home safely and go there safely without a whole bunch of problems?
I'm actually going to ask if it's okay, Chair, I want to ask the committee a question, because based on some of these conversations, I might want to go back to Metro Transit and bring some things forward to the TAAC. But when was the last time that you all heard an update on the safety and security action plan? Has it been a while?
We actually just got a safety and security plan. What was it, about 3 months ago? Yeah, I would like, I mean, I did see the news report just the other day about it. So, I mean, maybe that would be something good that we can put back on our schedule. But
Yeah, I think at least twice a year we discuss safety here. But I know that's not the focus of this, but obviously it fits into more than one of these principles.
Right.
And I think it's important that you brought that up.
Well, and it's a hot topic in the news right now. The Met Council, they have their plan forward, and they're now trying to implement it and so forth. So.
It's just hard to do this program if it's not some kind of knowing that my child or the person, well, for me, it would be like me, disabled, because my mom and dad, when they were alive, my dad wasn't so concerned because he trusts. My mom was very concerned going out in the night, you know, and will I get home safe? And I'm a girl, you know, and I'm a lady, and I'm a person with a disability, but then how do I have a life? Because it doesn't just stop in daylight, you know?
Right.
And so, and I have to rely on you guys to take care of me and trust that you're going to take me to A to B, you know?
Right. And why I asked that previous question of the committee was a lot of ways Network Now is trying to address where do we put our network, where do we put our buses and resources, but fully understanding that to be successful, we need a safe, welcoming, a secure, safe, and welcoming system. And there's a whole bunch of efforts underway right now, many through the Safety and Security Action Plan, to try to tackle some of those things in particular that kind of go beyond what I'm presenting today. But we could definitely get into more detail with the committee. Mainly what I want to stress is that in all the work that we do, safety always comes up, and we take it very seriously.
Yeah, I mean, and part of maintaining infrastructure is maintaining the safety of that infrastructure too.
Right,
Well,
right.
and,
Yeah, go ahead, Darrell.
You said one thing in the beginning of your presentation, Sophie, and I'm not sure how to get back to it. You said something about being proactive and being relating to maintenance or something relating to the service or the level of service. Do you, and I'm trying to understand how I can rephrase my question, but, and then you said you'll give us some examples at the end. At the end, you'll give us at least one example of how that is or what that is. And I was wondering if we can get back to that a little bit. Am I off track or not?
No, I'm trying to think about how, maybe what I was talking about is in principle number 2. So as we make these investments in infrastructure in the metro network, when we build a bus rapid transit, or whether it's an arterial or dedicated, we're putting a lot of money into building the infrastructure. But then this project, Network Now, still has to think of, okay, how much to run a B-line, a metro B-line, how many operators do we need? How do we ensure that we can operate B-line how we want to when we open it? And so that takes planning now. It was probably what I was referring to.
Don't we already know those numbers by looking at basically the D line or the C line or any other line that we already currently open, right?
It could be new information.
Isn't it a formula we just plug in generally? I mean, unless ridership is so differently from one area to the next, it would be.
I hear what you're asking, and why this is specifically called out is, right now Metro Transit has pretty steady operator hiring. But when we started this project, and even if you look at how many lines we're wanting to open over the next handful of years, it takes a fair amount of resources. So it's a legit question to have on the table. Like, if you hire 30 operators and it takes 30 operators to operate a new service, should they all go there?
Right.
And so this project is trying to help answer that, because we do know, to your point exactly, that it'll take, X amount of people to do this or X amount of people to do this. Like, to operate the blue and green line at 10-minute frequency, it requires a certain amount of train operators, which we know. And then it's getting to those numbers. So it's we're making as you make these investments to improve transit, there's also ongoing investment that you have to make. And
the one thing I was hoping you would touch on would be, like, we're buying different vehicles, or we have a different maintenance contract, meaning that our vehicles are serviced more often because they're being utilized in a heavy weather climate area or whatever. So something that kind of shines as to why we have the problems that we do and why we need the investment that we need to make it work,
I hear that, and I think from multiple comments on this committee, I'm really taking away the point that wherever you invest, wherever you put resources, the experience has to be good. That commitment to the customer experience has to be good, and that needs to kind of translate through all that we do. So that's, I think that we can really think about that as we move into some of the next steps as we're looking at these various principles, maintaining that overall customer experience and emphasizing that as a metric is definitely something we can bring forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Patty in the room, and then after that, Ken online.
Two related questions. In talking about the people that you're targeting as far as surveying, can you ask both? You're asking, do you have a disability? But I would add, not to itemized disabilities, but hidden disabilities and multiple disabilities. you could look at me and say Patty uses a wheelchair. And that's obvious, you know, relative if you see me for a while. But on my face, I don't have written that I have thought processing issues or that I get tremors when I get nervous. That's episodic. And so, and it's hard to leave one disability at home because it's either hidden or isn't occurring at that moment, but might. Does that make some sense? Because not to pinpoint somebody, just to say, we want to have 10%, I'm just picking a number of the year. We want to have 10 people identified that have hidden disabilities, but to change, to broaden the thinking or to sort of get that in the mix of how, of the framework that you were talking about at the beginning. Am I making?
Yeah, you are.
sense?
And for the next survey we do, I will check to make sure that people can select multiple options and see how we could get at your question of hidden disabilities and how that might impact how people are responding.
It's
Hold
similar.
on one second. So this has come up multiple times in this committee over the years as to how we ask about disability.
Yeah.
I think that it's an important discussion to keep on going. I think it's more of an offline
Okay,
discussion.
sure.
I mean, we can do it, we can have a broader discussion in
Certainly.
here, but like in the weeds, like this could take hours and
Okay.
hours of discussion and
Yeah.
But it's a phenomenal question, and like once you start breaking things down, like do you
Yeah.
include everything? If that's the case, we'll have a list of 400 different disabilities because the list is probably unending. But that being said, I think coming up with some sort of framework is good. But we have entered this conversation, I think, a few times with different surveys. But it's a really good point, Heidi. We're not getting into the weeds though.
What
Please.
I was saying earlier, but in a different way, how do you look beyond just one type of disability and see the whole person as, me and her are multiple disabilities, we're not one type. So you might ask the question one way and her answer might be totally different than mine, and you would have thought we would give the same answer, and we didn't, because I experienced that completely different than she does, because she has two things I never experienced or never had. So I see it different, but I'm still answering your question, So it just opens up the way you think, and I want the committee, whoever you take this back to have a really good open mind to look at not just the stereotypical type of, wheelchairs and only walkers and that's it, you know what I mean? But it's the bigger picture. And people from all over the world, because we all answer those questions differently, and depends on our culture and what we grew up in.
Ken? Oh, go ahead.
Definitely open to that feedback and ongoing discussion. I think we're trying to write questions on our demographics and ways to really get at what the committee is leaning towards, which is we want to understand how different needs show up and how people are responding so that we can respond to them and potentially address them in our decision making. So I've listened, and to the chair's point, we'll definitely take back any feedback that happens future from the Metro Transit tries to have a kind of a standard set of demographic questions that are based on this kind of ongoing
So we can
feedback.
go back to what David said, but not like 5,000 different disabilities, but make it so a lot of us get heard in a way that our voices are still there at the table.
And there's a lot of science behind surveys too, but we will not get into that. I'm of the mind, if you want a simpler survey, some people like more questions. I'm not that person, but Ken, go ahead, Ken.
And can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Thanks for
can.
being patient.
Okay, thank you. My buttons are not showing up when I click them, so thanks for the validation there. Just a comment. This doesn't have so much to do directly with the survey itself, but one thing I'm hearing with people's communication and discussion, and one thing I'm not hearing, about are things that I know to be part of the safety program. And I know a lot of work has been put into the safety program along our system. But one of the comments I'd like to just make is that we all have a responsibility as riders, not just riders with disabilities, but as riders of our public transit system, that if we see something that's not right, we need to say something. And I don't think enough people know about some of the safety features that are available. There's texting. We could text what we're seeing privately so that it gets reported immediately into the system and something can be done. They can dispatch public safety or whatever needs to happen if they receive notice that something's going on. But I think oftentimes we think just because we're people with disabilities, we need to have a safe ride without doing anything. We still have a responsibility to report what we're seeing. And that's part of our system. And we need to be engaged. So I don't know if the word can get back that more education might be beneficial to learn more about what can a rider do when they see or have a fear. There's call buttons on the trains. There's several things that can be done. And I think that will empower people if they're more aware of those things that can be done at that individual level to report stuff like that.
Thank you, Ken. Did you have a response? If not, I'll go to another committee member.
I would just like to acknowledge Ken's comments and that we both have robust systems and are working on even improving what we do. And so a check-in with the committee, I think would love to do that. I'll bring that back to my
I
colleagues.
agree with Ken.
Yeah, thank you very much. Darrell has a follow-up.
Ken, I also agree with you. I believe the code of conduct for ridership should be strengthened, and we should all be aware of what our responsibilities are when we choose to ride public transit. However, I will say that I'm not comfortable with anybody being disabled or not, whether they're elderly or disabled physically or emotionally or any other disability, putting themselves in any type of danger whatsoever. In the last several rides that I've rode in public transportation, if I was to report what I seen and report my ride, I would have clearly put myself in danger. Not only did I get robbed on the train multiple times, coming to and from this very meeting, okay? There's also a number of other things that go on those vehicles that are not safe or appropriate. I'm not going to be able to report it when it's happening. I may be able to report it after the fact, but if I choose to report it after the fact, my memory may not be what it was when it was happening. So I don't want to misconstrue any activity based on my own biases or my own prejudices based on what I think I saw or what I viewed with my own eyes. So I don't think it's appropriate to ask people with disabilities, particularly people with disabilities that may have processing issues or processing disabilities, to report things that they see. Maybe they should report it to a staff member, or maybe they could be able to text or something like that. But I would just urge the reporting factor very, very limited. And what time of day do you report it? Do you report it when it's happening? Do you report it after you're safe? Do you report it after you thought about it a while? Or do you simply live your life and understand that, yes, people do strange things on public transportation, and that's part of life. Unfortunately, it's part of some people's lives more than others, but yes, it's part of life. And it's not right, it's not safe, but until we get some uniformed officers on the train or some unsworn personnel on the train, which I've been clearly an advocate for. I don't think it's safe to ask people with disabilities to report what they're seeing, because you would put them in a very dangerous situation. I've gotten hit on the train. I've gotten spit on the train. I've gotten threatened multiple times, but I still got to keep riding that train. But so to your point, Ken, I value your point a lot, and I think the code of conduct needs to be something that we all are aware of, but I don't think reporting is something that we should get into at this moment.
Okay.
No, we're off topic now. Heidi, do you have a question about this line of
Yeah.
discussion right here? Or is it about the presentation?
It's about the presentation,
Go ahead.
but you guys are both right, you
I know, but if it's about this current line of discussion, I'm
Yes.
going to cut you off.
Are we also going to be looking at I don't know if it goes with what this presentation or not, but the disabled too have to play a part. It's not, because I've been on the bus
We all
where
have to
there's
play a
been
part.
people with disabilities that are causing the actual problem. And it's not, so it goes both ways. So just take that into consideration, when you do this project, when you talk about safety and wanting the best for us, you know what I mean? I don't know how to explain it without going out of the, like I get shut up and be quiet kind of thing. But I've seen it where the person with the disability is the one that's causing the problem, and the cops had to be on the bus and blah, 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 or on the train, blah, blah, blah. So just take that into consideration too. At the same time, you're looking at both sides of the Ken's issue and Darrell's issue, okay? Because I've seen it all. Thank you.
Safety is a concern. This is very much something that I think Metro Transit knows. So we're not going to go down that rabbit hole anymore right now, please. Are there any more questions regarding Network Now? Otherwise, I do have one more.
I think this is a good project. If she can come back and just give us updates and make sure that, because sometimes, and Human Services does this too. We promise you and we'll help you, but then we never really see some of the things that just really were excellent at those meetings, and got off the ground. So if you can come back and report to us, and we can tell you if that really sucks or if that's really good, or if we can help you improve it. Thank you.
Chair, committee members, I would hope that the intention with Network Now would be kind of what I did today, because it was a status update, right? I didn't have any necessarily next steps yet, but I wanted to report back on all the work that had happened and where we are now. I hope to come back multiple times, both as we begin our work and get your feedback on many of the points and things that folks have brought up today, as well as continue just to kind of update you on where the project lands in the process. So really happy to come back.
Hold on, please let her finish. Go ahead, Heidi.
So can we help you with some of the bugs, if there are some?
Of course.
Okay, cool, awesome.
So,
Go ahead.
Sophie, does Network Now, do they have an advisory committee? And if so, is there a TAAC member or a member from the disability community or a member from the transit community that serves in an advisory role with Network Now?
So Network Now, as a project, does not have a community or business advisory committee. We plan to get.
Internal, right? Are they an internal committee or?
So how we do Network Now is that there's a group of us that kind of are the workhorses behind the project, and then we have a project management team, which are made up of technical staff at Metro Transit that review our work. And then in terms of any feedback or advice, we then go to the broader public to get feedback. And that's why, for example, the draft report, I didn't really talk about it today, but we'll have an official comment period associated with it to ensure that we have those periods where
More importantly, I've tried to make sure that we do this in every committee that Metro Transit rolls out, or every committee that they want to work on. There's got to be an internal intention to put people in spaces where you want to advocate. So if there's not someone with a disability on that committee or in that framework, whether you search out your team and ask your team, is anybody here willing to disclose their disability? Then I think it's important that that's a huge component that you're missing as you're beginning your stages. And you cannot get that feedback just when we decide to do public engagement. You should be getting that feedback from the start, not just when we do public engagement.
So I have a question that might actually build on that / answer it.
Okay.
I would say that's happening right now.
Okay.
First of all, like you are that person who's
Right,
represented.
they're coming to us.
Yeah. So that's happening right now. Also, 20% of the respondents were individuals with disabilities. I'm curious if you did any in analyzing the data, and it's okay if not, but if you did, if anything came out when you look at disability and ethnicity or race.
Right.
Did you look at that as a group, and did anything come out of that different from what you have here?
So one of the, maybe this is answering your question, so tell me if I'm wrong, but income and disability often followed fairly similar patterns in terms of the data that we analyzed. We saw that pretty consistently across various things.
But nothing popped out when you merged either race and disability or socioeconomic and disability? And it's okay if you all didn't analyze it.
Yeah, we did multiple crosstabs, and what we were trying to get at is where there was differences. And we would see what we saw overall was that race, income, and disability status often, you get similar results, but often more kind of like the example that I gave, that you still get the same order, but a different magnitude. And kind of recognizing where that need is being represented.
That makes total sense. Thank you and that answers my question. Thank you. Did you have another follow-up, Darrell, otherwise?
No, I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for
To
helping.
your point too.
Thank you all for helping shape this project. We will come back as we advance into the next stages.
We gave her all.
All right, you're the star of the show for the remainder of, or at least for most of it, Andy. Feel free to tell us everything you got to tell us from right there.
All righty.
You can go to the front.
Andy Streasick, I manage customer service for Metro Mobility, as I think all of you know. And I'm going to do things a little bit differently in that I'm going to ask you guys some questions to start with, and I'm going to ask that you refrain from answering until I'm done with the presentation.
Is that even possible, Andy?
It's not just me, Darrell, it's you
As
too.
I know
That's
that.
on me.
It's me.
It's everybody.
All right, I'll make sure that happens, Andy, I promise.
Well, basically, I just
No,
want to
it's
know
just the way the
essentially what
question
kind
is
of
probably being
presentation you want here. I understand from our work on the TAAC business planning that Metro Mobility is going to be coming quarterly to present.
Yeah.
And to kind of help frame that, I want to know what stats you would like compared to what I'm going to present today. And then also how you would like it presented. Specifically there, you will note that I don't have a handout or a formalized presentation, which essentially gives us another week to get the previous month's data. So that allowed me to get September. I am happy to have a formal presentation ready, but I take seriously the requirement that that be ready at least a week in advance. So what you would be looking at there then is having 1 month less of data. So weigh those in your preferences, a written document distributed ahead of time versus more up-to-date stats. And then wondering what kinds of date ranges you would like in the stats themselves. If we're doing this quarterly, would you like just, since we last met kind of a thing, or would you like them broken down by month? What are your preferences there? And then finally, do you want quarterly updates that are just Metro Mobility stats? Or do you want the same meeting to encompass any kind of systems updates that might occur in terms of technology changes, hardware shifts, policy shifts, that kind of stuff, in addition to stats? So kick those around as I am discussing some Metro Mobility stats. I'm going to start with some complaint data. All of these are from July through October 30th. I'm just going to break them down by provider and then give you some information on the hottest topics. East Zone, we had 155 validated complaints about the East Zone provider in that period. And the most popular topics there are some kind of a late ride, be it appointment time or arrival time, or no-show disputes. If you look at West Zone, we had 287 in the same period. In addition to those same two with East, the no-show disputes and the some kind of ride late, the other really big one for West is non-ADA trip denials. And you'll see as I get back a little bit deeper into the stats that trip denials, are certainly an issue with West and to a certain extent South.
Andy, real quick clarification.
So I need the difference between the 150 or the 164 versus the 2 something. Do you think that's because of the trip denials?
It's a combination of two things, I think. Vice Chair, members of the committee, I don't know if everybody made that out. Darrell was asking, do I think that the difference in the stat numbers is related exclusively to denials? And I think it's two things. I think it's trip denials. It's actually probably, to be fair, 3 things. It's trip denials. It's the fact that historically West Zone is our highest performer, statistically speaking, and that they have fallen. And then thirdly, of course, it's that they're by far our largest zone in terms of ridership. Yep. So even if they had the same number of complaints per rider, they would have more complaints.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I wouldn't have necessarily put that together, so that's good.
South Zone had 92 complaints over that period, and again, those two kind of rise to the top, either no-show disputes or service lack of service for non-ADA rides. Non-ADA denials are also a factor with South Zone. And then I did pull the agency contract. Very few complaints ever come about on agency. It's an exclusively standing order-based system and has as almost always the case when we do get them, and there were 6 over that time period. There's not really a pattern. Could be that, the types of complaints we tend to get for agency tend to be about, my son has sensory issues and the driver we normally get is willing to sing to him to help de-escalate things. We had a different driver. We might consider that a valid complaint, even though we're obviously not going to require that our vehicle operators sing. What we do recognize is that it assists in every passenger, or a lot of passengers, stability and maintenance if they can have similar drivers on a reliable basis whenever possible. So we try to make a note of that if we can.
Will you, it doesn't come up very often, but will you just give us a reminder of what the agency service is?
Yeah.
We don't talk about it a lot here,
Yeah, agency service is kind of our fourth contract, unique in that it is not geographically zone-based, other than that it has to fall within the ADA service area. And what those are is Metro Mobility rides for Metro Mobility certified riders, typically to an old-fashioned DT&H or a day program. The center-based LifeWorks and Opportunity Partners of the world, where if you think about it as like a school bus run, we tend to be picking up, because it's all standing order based, the same groups of people from their homes to the centers in the same order every day, day after day. So I'd say experientially much more similar to a school bus than what is experienced on the demand contracts.
Thank you.
You bet.
And on the day side program, I mean, I know, do you break down the numbers between like people that go to day programs versus like when you're dropping them off at a senior program or like because I remember like the day programs used to say, oh no, we only do these rides. We don't drop off at senior programs. And now I think you drop off at both, right? Differentiate between the two.
No, yeah, there are definitely elements of our agency contract that serve the senior community. And we don't differentiate explicitly between what might technically be considered a vocational site and what is a senior day program. Just a center is a center is a center for that. If it has adequate clientele base and is within the ADA service area, then it would qualify.
Yeah, and Andy, the reason I brought that up is because that changes when we go outside the metro area, right? When we go to the suburbs and we go to different counties, right? So in greater Minnesota, doesn't that change because the funding source changes around there, right?
No, the agency contract, the agency is being billed itself for the service. So however the agency may recoup funds is not our concern there. We are billing the agency regardless of where it is in the system, what county it's in, and then they're paying. So for this particular service, whether or not they're receiving funds from an elderly waiver versus a caddy or something like that aren't going to make any difference.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. I'll talk a little bit about the last quarter's stats and year-to-date stats to kind of take a look at some trends. And I'll try to break it down by service type to illustrate some prioritization. If we look at system-wide, where we are versus kind of where we want to be, we gauge sort of three main key performance indicators. On-time performance in terms of when we show up. Did we arrive to pick you up within the half-an-hour window? On-time performance in terms of appointment time. Did we get you where you were going by the time you said you needed us to get you there? And maximum on-board time. Was the amount of time that you were on that vehicle roughly equivalent to the amount of time that it would have taken to take the city bus there, including the time it takes a person to self-propel to and from the bus stop. So looking at each of those key performance indicators system-wide for the year to date, our on-time performance is at 89.3, which is slightly less than where we would want it from a federal standard. The feds are still being very understanding of the reality of the situation, that being we are still very much coming out of a pandemic as it relates to the labor market with drivers, and just as impactfully a supply line in terms of our ability to get vehicles. So that, they are aware of the challenges, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the standard for on-time performance is 90, and we are at 89.3 so far. So we're getting there, we're continuing to improve, but we are not yet where we want it to be. On board time, the federal requirement is 95%, and we're at 96.5 system-wide. For appointment times, again, 90% is the standard. They look at it essentially as one stat. Did we get you to where you need to be by the time you told us you needed to get there? And we're hitting 86.9 system-wide right now. So again, work to do there. Now that said, those stats aren't what the feds would look at, because that's the entirety of our service, including about the third that is non-ADA. So if we look at just the ADA service area, on-time performance goes up from 89.3 to 89.6. So our on-time performance improves slightly to indicate the greater prioritization we place on federally mandated rides. Similarly, for appointment times, it goes up to 87.2 so far year to date. And on board time, while still compliant, actually drops slightly to 96.1. And the reason for that drop, despite our prioritization of federally mandated rides, is that non-ADA rides tend to be longer. And with longer rides, it's much easier to hit our on-board time requirements. For ADA paratransit, the rides that it's most challenging to hit a comparable standard on are the shorter rides on Metro Transit. So because longer rides are easier to hit, it shifts to make it much easier to hit your maximum on-board time numbers for those non-federally mandated rides.
And that's because they're picking you up within that window time, right?
No, it's it's based on trip distance. So the formula that we would use to calculate what is comparable is mileage times 4 plus 15 minutes to get to the bus stop and 15 minutes to get from the bus stop. For a total of 30 minutes. So mileage times 4 plus 30 gives you that comparable time in minutes. If your trip is 1 mile long, that essentially means we've got 34 minutes to get there. But if your trip is 15 miles long, right, it's much easier to get the paratransit trip done within that time frame. Next, if we go to denials, those are something that very much impact our non-ADA customers and our customers who travel or live in non-federally mandated service areas. And when we talk about federally mandated and talk about what the feds are going to look at in ADA versus non-ADA, the last thing I want to do is sound dismissive of that user experience. The reality is, if you exclude the fairly recent addition of Lakeville, right, we've been serving about the same service footprint since the 1970s. That's a long time. That's literally generations at this point for those of us with disabilities to build our lives, around the understanding that we have an accessible transit system that will allow us to meet our needs. So I don't want to say anything that could possibly be interpreted as minimizing the impact that that has on somebody when this system that has been in place since the 70s and that has been reliably providing them rides suddenly tells them that they can't do the ride. It's a big deal. And to that point, I want to speak to some of those. You know, even though these are legal, they are very, very impactful to our local disability community and certainly require mentioning.
Andy, before you continue, I did think that Sam was trying to ask a question. Was that, am I right, Sam, or not?
Yes, I was.
Yes,
If it's okay.
it is.
Andy, I was just wondering, when you're talking about these stats and you're talking about the feds counting them, are they, I'm presuming they're counting the overall number and not breaking down each individual provider, correct?
Yeah, I can break that down more for you. Again, that goes to those questions I asked you to keep in mind. But yeah, those
No, I
stats I gave you
understand.
so far on KPI percentages are system-wide.
Yeah, so
I understand that, but the feds look at the system-wide, not the individual, correct?
Yeah, the feds don't care how we choose to break down our system. For compliance, the feds will look at our entire system performance. Now, that said, what they will also do is look at individual days of the week and individual customers. So it's possible for one zone to kind of lift up other zones, but the feds would still take an issue with it if, say, every Tuesday or every Saturday, our service tanked, or every day between the hours of 2 p.m. and 3 p.m., our service tanked, or Andy Streasick has an on-time performance in the 70s so far year to date. The feds would look at all of that as potential capacity constraints. So while they do look overall at the system, they also try to drill down into specifics to make sure there aren't predictable capacity constraints that rear their head day after day.
Thank you.
When you say that they look at individual, they don't look at individual as far as how it impacts the system, or they do look at how they impact the system. You know, if they have a 70 rating, but do they ever look at how, like, let's say that individual gets all the rides generally because of how they schedule them or when they schedule it at the time of day, versus somebody else in that same area doesn't get hardly half their ride schedule. Do they look at anything like that?
So to clarify, Vice Chair, members of the committee, everybody within the federally mandated service area gets all their rides every time they schedule them. So the feds don't look at any customer who doesn't get their rides because those rides by definition are non-federally mandated and are not subject to federal requirements.
So they're not necessarily.
So so the feds aren't going to care about, you know, Andy lives in Lakeville and only gets his rides half the time, but Darrell lives in Lakeville and he gets his rides 100% of the time, because there are a variety of very real operational reasons that might be the case. Maybe Darrell's ride is 2 miles long and, you know, going into wherever, South Bloomington, and you know, maybe I'm trying to go to Anoka. So no, they don't look at that. But for those rides that are federally required, that are within the ADA footprint, part of the analysis of capacity constraints is, you know, is each individual user's experience pretty close to our federal standard for KPIs?
Thank you.
Yep. And again, KPI is key performance indicator. Just basically, are we doing the job we're supposed to do with our stats? For no-shows,
Is it, hold on one second, is it clarifying?
Well, yeah, because
Okay, go
when we
ahead.
get the new, I heard, because I wasn't at the meeting, because something came up. At that once-a-year meeting, when you talk about Metromobility, you were going to go to GPS, change to Google Maps and stuff. Will that change some of our numbers big time, you think?
well, we are hopeful, Heidi, members of the committee, that the change to Google Maps will make it easier for our drivers to find some folks and stop driving around in circles, particularly in the
Oh, yeah,
deep
they-
suburbs, which could very well lead to better on-time performance for a lot of rides. So, yeah, it is our hope that that will improve
So will
things.
that change how you talk about it in the future, just because, or will you be saying that pretty much the same stuff? Because I don't know if that will bring it even more clearer, or more better, you know what I mean?
Yeah, how we analyze things and how we talk about them will stay the same.
Okay.
But it's our hope that it will allow our drivers to be more productive with existing resources.
Okay.
All right, I'll get to no-shows here. System-wide year to date through October 30th, we did 6,970
And I'm in there.
denials, none of which were done by the East Zone. So, East Zone, no denials.
And why?
Because they've had the capacity to be able to do all their rides, including non-ADA rides. The South Zone, over the last 2 months, has done all of theirs.
Oh, that's good.
All their denials, have taken place within the last 2 months of the year. They didn't have any until September. They did 830 of them in September. And in October, they did 161. So we are aggressively trying to target denials while moving up our federally mandated stats. We understand that we need to prioritize our federally mandated rides, but I will go back to what I said before. We take denials very seriously and understand they are an impediment to the independent living movement, and they're not what we're cool with. So we are working on that, and we think those efforts are clear with the drop in the 1 month from, 830 to 161. That leaves West Zone, again, largest zone, who has struggled in a new sort of way recently for a variety of reasons, to have performed 5,979 denials so far this year. I will say I believe in my research for these stats that 10 of those are false. There were 3 that took place in February and 7 that took place in July that were coded as denials but appear to have been performed.
Oh, yeah.
And I think what happened, same day performed and denial due to denial, which is what we call the return trip of a ride that we could have done, but we didn't do it because we denied the go ride due to a capacity constraint, are right next to each other on the drop down. And it looks to me like those were same day rides that were actually performed, those 10, but the person doing the trip edits accidentally called them a denial due to a denial. I think those 10 were not true denials, both because it looks like we did the trip, obviously, and also because it wouldn't make any sense to have a denial due to a denial without a corresponding capacity denial, which would be the other leg of the trip. And those aren't there for those.
So they read.
Now, that said,
What you're saying is they said it was a denial, they put it down as a denial, but in some way, capacity, they ended up picking up the individual or performing?
yeah, they accidentally
One leg of the
coded an
trip,
existing
they-
trip as a
they
denial
ended
as
up
a data
picking up
entry
one
error.
leg of the trip, which didn't correlate with both of the trips being denied. So that's why you knew that they were not performed incorrectly,
It was
right?
input error is what it was.
Yep, just a data entry error there.
Inputting the data was incorrectly. They selected the wrong thing.
Now, that said, you get up to September, and there's where the authentic denials become, a conscious decision to start doing, and they had 3,462 of them. And again, we've seen a sizable drop, but we recognize that it's still problematically large. In October through the 30th, 2,507 of them for West Zone.
Go ahead, Heidi.
My question is, does that have to do with the actual software part, or is it really, the person who has to enter that in the computer?
No, that's just a human
I
error.
did everything correctly, it's just that it got entered in, because sometimes computers, depends on how they rate the software, can think it's like a denial on top of denial, because I don't know how you wrote the software. And then, or it could be the person, who has to enter it in.
Yeah, nope, it's a true data entry error, human error. And with that, I'm gonna go to trip counts. So rather than talking about percentages here, these are raw trip numbers. And I can present these however you would like here, by provider or system-wide. But I will tell you that we don't have October yet because of the edited trip counts, and because when I was doing this on the 30th, October wasn't done yet.
A quick note before you start. I just want to, I want to rattle through numbers here. I don't want to try to get into the why right now because we are limited on time, and I want to make sure that you all have all the data points that you can choose from.
Okay.
Just so we know when we do provide feedback to Andy about what we want to hear, we know what we're actually able to hear. So
Yeah.
rather than kind of dig into this data, I just want to kind of have it all dumped on us so we
Sure.
can then decide afterwards, because we still have one more agenda item as well. And how much time do you need for that?
I'll try to go quick.
Okay.
So bottom line here is, if you want, I could break down our total system trips by provider, or I could do system-wide. In the interest of time today, I'll do system-wide. Just know that typically West is by far our largest provider, reliably month after month, followed by East, followed by South, and then agency. In January of this year, we performed 147,612 passenger trips. And let me know if I'm being too specific. If you want me to abbreviate, that's fine too. February was 151,449. March, 185,055. April, 169,485. May, 179,841. June, 172,464. July, 161,752. August, 181,943. September, 162,209. We will this year again be back at over 2 million rides for the year, which did not happen during the pandemic. Puts us at one of the largest paratransit providers in the country because of the way we structure our paratransit service. And I think that that is all I've got. Because I'm not doing these every month now, if you guys want to hold off a month and think about how you'd like data presented, that's fine. Or if you have preferences that are clear now, after hearing this presentation, let me know now.
Thank you. So thank you, Andy. That was very informative. And I don't think now is the best time to, scattershot everything that we want to hear from Andy. Maybe sleep on it. Also, one request, if it is possible, not actual, like the actual data, but just the points that you collect that are available to us, just like a list, denials, total trips, on-time performance, on-board time,
What stuff can we ask people?
appointment. As far as I know, that's all that you did here, but then you can, I then again break those down by system-wide, ADA versus non-ADA, and then by zone as well.
So that was helpful.
Yeah, I can absolutely do that, but what I would
Break it
say
down by
is,
time of day.
just because I do it now already or have done it, doesn't mean that that's all we could do. So I can give you what I'm aware of, what I think of when I think about stats, but don't feel like that's all we've got, because, maybe we can come up with something else. I mean, there's nothing wrong with you asking for something and us finding out we can't do it, and we'll tell you no.
Right, and that goes to my point with Ken. I know Ken has been very big instrumental on getting these, getting this metro mobility stats and this data back on our schedule. So my point with Ken and talking to David is, Ken, are there particular items that you would like to see on the data that that Andy can present to us? And whether you know all of them now, you can shoot it over to us, or whether you know a couple of them that maybe weren't mentioned that you'd like to see that Andy might be able to look at and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, or oh yeah, I'll add that next time.
And this is David. And Ken, not to put you on the spot, we can take this offline too if you want, if you need to marinate on it a little bit.
Yeah, two things. I would like to have a off the time discussion about this, so we could dig into it a little bit deeper and not take up our time here. But one thing I would like to just again suggest, and this isn't new, Andy, you've heard this before from me, but the percentages, I appreciate the percentages, but I would also like the number that those percentages reflect. It's really too easy for us to look at a 90% number and say, well, that's pretty darn good. 90s, if you're in the 90s, that's pretty decent. But those, whatever number that represents, are still individual people that have encountered a situation. And I think it's more reflective for us to also see the actual number.
Yeah, that's right, Ken. I remember those conversations from when we used to do stats monthly. So yeah, we can absolutely add those in. No problem.
Okay.
Jasmine?
Yes, go ahead, Sam.
I want to just echo what Ken says, and I actually would appreciate them broken down by zone and month, because although the no denials in one zone was excellent, mine was not. So I can tell you that great number, or somewhat almost great number, was not the case in every zone. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, and I will tell you, just to help with expectations, in trying to play with this, I was a little surprised that KPIs by month for me didn't work as slick as I would have liked. We may end up having to do quarter, but I will try to do month, broken down by provider. It might also just be, we're using a different, much more advanced reporting tool than we were back when I was doing these on an Excel spreadsheet myself, right out of Trapeze. So I might just need to bone up on that. We'll see what I can do.
So I'll take real quick comment from Heidi, and then I'm gonna make a comment, and then we're gonna move on. Go ahead, Heidi.
My question is, and this happens in human services, they're like a month behind because of how the system is, putting the data in. So is it the data that you're gonna give us gonna be a little off? Because you were saying like I couldn't do October because October 30, I was still waiting for the people to finish their rides and this stuff. So how do we get close to what is accurate enough to learn from?
Yeah, what I'd really like you guys to weigh is particularly, in terms of how you happen to process information, in terms of how beneficial it is for you to have a readable document in front of you or electronically delivered to you. Would you rather have that and be a month behind or a month and a half behind? Or would you rather have us deliver something only verbally like I did today, and be as up to date as we can? Again, as up to date as we can, probably not including the previous month for some of the stuff, based on how our billing works. But that's the type of trade-off information I'd really like to hear from you guys, so we can give you the stuff that is most responsive to your
Sometimes that
needs.
tells the story differently, because you're missing a month, so I understand, like in human service, a month behind, so then I understand the process.
Well,
of the end.
so I'm going to interrupt you. The data is there. It's a matter of just getting it into format to be delivered to us. That's
No,
what
no,
that.
that's
Hold
not
on.
what you-
That's what we need the month. He gave us data up to yesterday.
He
But
said
verbally.
he couldn't do October 30 because it was still being in process, so I'm thinking it's a little bit behind.
For total monthly trip counts, for that part, you're both right. There's a bunch of data points for which I gave info through October 30th, the day that I did this. And then for some other data points where we are reliant on information coming back to us from the contractor and being edited, we get that on a monthly basis, and that I couldn't do for October when I was doing it on October 30th, because October wasn't done yet.
So think about how you want the data presented to you. I also want to pose a question to you all as well. Think about how we can use this data to inform Metro Mobility. What impact could it have? Does it have? Will it even have an impact? Are we hearing this? Like, why are we hearing this, and what can we bring to the discussion as a group of folks with disabilities who use public transit, Metro Mobility specifically too? I think that's very important to think about when you're looking at it. Sam, go ahead, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'll make mine quick.
Go ahead.
I presume that the meeting minutes will reflect all these numbers that Andy has just spewed out if we were to ask for them verbally, correct? So when we get the meeting minutes next time, it should reflect all these numbers?
I'm not sure if it'll be that specific.
She has that look like, I don't know.
I know, I mean, I was furiously writing numbers down, but that doesn't mean everybody else was too.
And if we did that way,
Hold on,
we would
hold on.
discuss.
Let's wait for a recognition from the chair before we talk, folks, please. Go ahead, Sam.
If you did that, then it would be worth having that extra amount verbally so that we would be most up to date. But if they're not going to be even in the meeting minutes, then you know.
I don't want to commit our admin staff to that level of specificity without talking to them offline. But yeah, we can absolutely, I can get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe we can just get an abbreviated version that she can, that they can look at ahead of time, so that they can at least have some of the points that you're gonna talk about when you give the update.
And so what this was really like an initial introduction to this, to then have us decide how we want to be presented in terms of information, but also what information do we want to be presented with. So that essentially is the overarching question here. Do we want it in paper format ahead of time? If so, the data is going to be a month behind. If we want it presented like it was today, verbally, it could be up to the day before. So that's the first question. The second question then is what stuff do we want to be presented with? What data points do we want to be presented with? That's the question to you all. Go ahead, Darrell.
And I think, Chair, to your point, I think that's what we asked of Andy, or you asked of Andy earlier, is that if he could just give us a list of what data points that we can look at for now, so that we know, hey, there's 20 different areas that you guys can look at. You want to look at all of them, or you want to pick the top 5, or you want to pick the top 10 or something? But at least give us the information and say, this is all the data that you can look at. Now, I'm not wanting to look at all of it. You can be honest, tell us that, say, hey, we don't need to look at all of it, but maybe look at the top 5 or the top 10 or something. Give us some guidance, and then, that makes your job a little easier as well, Andy.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't be able to come up with an exhaustive list of all the data that could be culled from our databases, obviously. But what I can do is, again, give you sort of what I perceive as a fairly complete list of options
Right.
for our data. And then again, if there's anything that you guys think ought to be in there, certainly ask about it, because it's entirely possible that I'm missing something that we can get and should get. So let me know.
I think that last important, I'll lead you in just a second, Darrell. I think that last point is kind of important and kind of neat too, because if it's something that Andy or Metro Mobility staff maybe wouldn't consider as something that they should look up, but we're like, hey, what about this particular data point? Can we get that? So we can get creative in our questions to Andy with potential data points. And we're not promising that we can get that data, but we could at least potentially try. So that's kind of nice. Please wait till I'm done too. But we can potentially have new data. So another thing to get creative, think about. Go ahead, Darrell.
Right, so that brings me up to my point. Is it easier, Andy, to give us a list of things that we can't ask for? Is that a very smaller list? Because maybe if there's things that we can't specifically ask for, then maybe we can figure out and be more creative on the things that we can ask for.
No, Vice Chair, members of the committee, I mean, think of this as just a big pile of numbers. And it's sort of what data points are infinite.
Because it's just aggregated data.
But what we can get, I can work with folks on, so.
Hold on.
Ask if you
Please
want.
wait, please. I'm gonna say this one more time today. We're almost done here. We do like to wait for folks to finish talking before we talk. Also, I don't stick to this as a rule all the time, but I think I might have to. Please wait for the recognition of the chair before you start talking. Go ahead, Heidi.
Will this help the legislators when you're saying we can probably take this and teach and learn and help other people? Will this also help the legislators when they ask about transportation?
Heidi, members of the committee, I can't really speak to what might help legislators understand our system, frankly. It would be nice if there was some data-driven understanding.
Okay.
When it comes to speaking to legislators as a constituent, you can talk to a legislator or any public official if they'll give you the time of day. Again, you could speak to your personal experience and things that you know about. Right. In Metro Mobility, as a matter of speaking on behalf of this committee, we can't do that without the approval of the majority of the committee members. Okay. But as a constituent, please seek out any public official you want.
No, that's a good question to ask, because it sounds like
so
you can take it further.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, when Andy gives us that data, you can take it as an individual with your leaders, your legislators, and you can talk about it. But you cannot explicitly say that you're representing TAAC when you present that, unless we give you permission to do so.
Eric?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to take this offline, or would we just get emailed?
Yeah.
So an email will go out to the group and then we can kind of all respond, aggregate our responses and then take it from there.
Yeah, I'm thinking of January to revisit this.
Yeah, given the robust discussion, it might even make sense to put it on the agenda for January in terms of your responses to my questions. So, I can email out ahead of time sort of what I see as the typical data points. You can decide what you want and don't want and what you might want to add, and we can run with it from there.
Yeah, I'm also toying with the idea, again, plant a seed, not to make a decision here, of maybe doing work more offline in small group settings. So a work group with maybe 2 or 3 of us that really are data nerds. No, I'm not looking at you, Ken. Who can maybe do this in a more in-depth basis, like as a group of committee members, and then we can fire questions to Andy.
And then you can present it to the bigger group, so that all of us don't have to say, oh, I don't know.
Just a seed to plant. We have 4 minutes left. We have one more agenda item.
All right. I'm not taking any questions or feedback on community conversations, but you can email me. Essentially, we had around 35 Metro Mobility customers attend each of the 2 days. So about 70-ish total. I should say we will get more specific data back within the next week or so from Zan, the contractor that helps us organize these things. But the first one was the in-person one on the night of the 17th. That was from 5:30 to 8 p.m. At Wilder. I served as kind of a float, wandering around and trying to eavesdrop on tables to get a broad sense of what was going on. The virtual one was held from 11:30 to 1 in the afternoon on 10/25. The virtual one's harder for me to get a full sense because I was in one breakout room. I think there were 6. But I will tell you about my main takeaways, both from my room and the virtual conversation and from walking around to all the tables at Wilder. One, again, our KPIs, our key performance indicators are struggling still post-pandemic as we've kind of risen our demand side up to just about normal ridership to a degree that they have not ever struggled in the 18-ish years that I've been doing this. System-wide, our performance overall is a bit lower than it's ever been for me in my tenure here. So that said, I will say far and away my biggest astonishment at the community conversation was how positive most of the comments were. You know, the appreciation of drivers, the appreciation of the service overall, the recognition that we are still very much coming out of an unprecedented event in our lives that totally impacted the world in a way that we never could have anticipated, understanding of supply line, appreciation of some of what we're doing to try to creatively get around that. Very positive feedback that way. Chief amongst the positive comments related to driver mate, and Heidi brought this up already, but probably from a customer standpoint, the most exciting thing about driver mate, which is a new software that will allow us to go from using Rangers to using tablets, is that will allow for Google mapping functionality. So real-time traffic, real-time weather, that's great for customers, but the biggest thing is that the mapping will no longer be just trapeze mapping, it'll be Google Maps, which obviously has some big benefits. People saw the Pass app, the online booking app, for the first time, a lot of people, with their own eyes, and it was a great selling point. You know, they walked out and saw 18 other Metro Mobility passengers doing this, looking at where their bus was going to be, watching a dot, you know. That was a big selling point, and it made me think that maybe we should do potentially a public meeting just to advertise that app, because again, that was good. Last thing I'll say is that I was pretty adamant in my advocating for one each, a virtual and an in-person, for our 2 community conversations this fall. Heard a lot of positive feedback about that, and I think we'll probably do that going forward. I think the horse has left the barn in terms of just requiring an in-person meeting, and I think we particularly at a disability service organization would be very, very hypocritical if we did not acknowledge the barrier to accessibility that it would be to require only in-person meetings. So I think we will do one in person probably and one virtually going forward for these community conversations. I kept you here 1 minute late.
Thank you.
We're done.
Are there any members of the public who want to make a comment right now? Are you resigning from the committee? I'm sorry, that was a bad joke.
Member comment.
All right, I'm just messing with you, Heidi. Okay, now that there are no members of the public who would like to make a comment, are there any members of the committee? Yes, Heidi, go ahead.
Can we have a virtual meeting in the evenings and not just in the daytime for the people who work in the daytime and that really want to come?
I like
Because
that.
I've heard people saying, well, I can't get there on time, you know, and it would be great indeed to have an evening one to help you out. I don't know if you can have 3.
Heidi, members of the committee, I don't think we'll do 3, but I think what I'll advocate for next time is to flip him so that our in-person one is midday and our virtual one is in the evening.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all very much for staying 2 minutes extra, and I apologize for not getting to every last thing on the agenda, but
No,
I
it
think,
worked out
I think
okay,
we,
I'm okay.
yeah, thank you, Heidi. I think we covered the good, the meaty stuff that matters. What I had to say didn't mean anything. All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you.